5 of the most disappointing albums from 2017. Yeah, this year had a lot of disappointments, honestly. I feel like more so than most other years. I don't know if that is something that many people agree with. But even some albums that I thought were good or really good still somehow disappointed me because they just didn't live up to the expectations I had. A few examples: St. Vincent, a good album but not great. Big Crit, I didn't think was as good as what people were saying. Joey Badass is another one there. Lord, again, I thought that album had a few weak spots on it, honestly. Yeah, you know, even those albums that are good still didn't really get me in the way I thought they were going to. Which in itself can be sometimes more disappointing than listening to an album that's just not good at all, because at least those albums you might not have had any expectations for, but this list is going to be ones that really did disappoint. And a few honourable mentions. I'm going to start with Sleaford Mods. They had an album out this year. Does anyone remember? Because I don't, and that in itself is just a massive letdown. Destroyer, I thought Ken was honestly a really lackluster album, a really boring, bland 80s synth pop, New Order ripoffs on that album. The lyrics just couldn't grab me because of how bored I was listening to the music. And finally, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. No specific album, but they did disappoint me with a few of their albums this year. Flying Microtonal Banana was great though. Just everything after that didn't really feel as fulfilling as I'd hoped to get from the highly conceptual ideas that they had. They just weren't executed to the best I thought they could have been. Now the list, I'm going to rank them down from 5 to 1 because I think it's just going to be a bit more fun that way. Number 5, The National, Sleep Well Beast. Now, you know, this album really wasn't like bad in any way. It's why it's at number 5, because it's probably the best on this list, but I fucking loved Trouble Will Find Me, and this honestly felt like a huge step down, and the music felt so grey and bland, just like that James Blake album from last year. It just didn't really feel like it was getting to the aesthetic it was trying to reach. Like, I know it wasn't meant to be an album that was going to instantly put you in a good mood, but I thought if they'd have carried on the theme of what this system in Total Darkness, whatever that track is called, if they all sounded as good as that one, it would have been a great album. The System Only Dreams in Total Darkness was the track I was thinking of there. That song had such a unique sound to it. I think that it was so different for the National's sound. It had an electronic driven melody which could have been really cool if they'd done the whole way through, but it just ended up being pretty drab, honestly. I wasn't captivated by the music, and in all fairness, they are really far into their career, so there are going to be a few albums in a band's career that's gone as long as they have that are not going to be as good as others, but still I just thought this one really could have been a lot better than it was. And number 4, LCD Soundsystem's American Dream. The fans really did overrate this one, honestly, and to be honest, I didn't really expect a whole lot from it because it just felt a bit of a weird album to come out like so many years after their career had technically ended. I didn't really think that this one was all that necessary to put out, and then hearing it really felt like there weren't any new ideas that they were going for that they really needed to put onto an album so late after their career had ended. And I think they were 3 for 3 of putting out perfect, well, near perfect albums, that this 4th one honestly isn't ever going to be one that I'm going to mention when I talk about LCD Soundsystem. I'm just going to ignore it as a release, to be honest, because of how good those other ones were. This one's just going to feel like it's dragging down the discography that they had. What were they really doing here that they needed to do that was so different from what they were doing before? And when it was slightly different, it was just boring, like that closing track and a few other tracks in the album too that just went on like 4 minutes longer than they should have. They never used to do that because usually their longest tracks ended up being the most epic and like eventful, but on this album they just didn't capture that sound. Number 3, Ariel Pink. dedicated to Bobby Jameson. Yes, this album to me was ugly as hell. I thought this production was sickening. It sounded so badly recorded. Like, I think people gave Ariel Pink an excuse for this because of his previous discography, like House Arrest and those early albums that were really lo-fi. And some people do rate those highly. I thought those albums were just okay, but this felt like he was trying to be too experimental for his own good. There were some poppier cuts in this album, and those ones did stand out, but just really for the whole of the album, doing the lo-fi sound and weird vocals that were so just obnoxiously eccentric. Like, it was eccentric for the eccentric for the sake of being eccentric. That's what I felt this album was. It wasn't really experimental, it was just weird. And to go from Pom Pom to this, it was just hugely disappointing for me. Yeah, I think again the fans like LCD Soundsystem, it was just the fans that hyped this one up. But honestly, this is one of his worst albums in the past few years, in my opinion. Number 2, Arcade Fire, Everything Now, an album that shouldn't even be on this list because I expected nothing and I was more disappointed than I ever thought I could be. This is easily the worst album on this list and possibly one of the worst albums I've heard all year. And this is from a band that used to put out perfect masterpieces from Funeral to The Suburbs and even Neon Bible, which I don't rate as highly as other people do, but still a very good album. This is cheap, tacky disco crap that really got forgotten 30-40 years ago, and Arcade Fire have decided to try and bring back now. For whatever reason, I do not know, because they just sound lame and old doing this. Even Regine, who has such an amazing voice, and whenever she came through on their older songs, she always brought out this interesting and passionate vocal delivery, and yet whenever she came up on this album, it just sounded shrill and ear-shriekingly. A lot of the sounds across this album were ugly. It just failed. And even the concept overall was just really patronizing and pretentious, like, oh, you know, we need to consume everything now these days, we can't just wait anymore, everything just has to be when we want it, we need it. And yeah, that is what it is a lot of the time, but I think it's always been that way. It's just that we have the access to it a lot more now, so the demand for it is a lot more. It would have been the same in the 80s if we had everything at our fingertips. People wouldn't have been different. It's just the way things have progressed. It's just a boring trope that I don't think needed to be tackled on a full album. Yeah, this was bad. But somehow not my number one, and you'll see why my number one is my number one. Humanz by Gorillaz at number 1. Yes, this was my biggest disappointment of the year. Again, sort of like LCD Soundsystem, up until this point, I don't think Gorillaz had put out a bad album. If anything, all their albums were near perfect. So of course, once again, years and years later, we get a comeback album from Gorillaz that just didn't even sound like an album. It sounded like a compilation of tracks that had completely different sounds across each song, and it just didn't flow at all. And most of these songs didn't even use the features very well, like Grace Jones and Dram, who was barely existent on Andromeda. Benjamin Clementine, that sounded like he was doing this stupid ghoulish like fairground ride voiceover for the haunted house ride shit thing. And he has such a great voice, so why would you waste it in that kind of way by just doing this cheap political anthem? And so many tracks as well has all these political jabs that felt so out of place, and I suppose it was supposed to be like a party anthem for the end of the world or whatever I think Damon Albarn stated at one point. But yeah, some of these tracks did bounce and were party jams, especially Ascension, which I love and I will always regard as a great Gorillaz song. That was just all I took from it. I don't want a compilation album from Gorillaz. I don't need every track to have all these features and barely any Damon Albarn, because it just makes it sound like wasted. It seemed like there was more emphasis on bringing in the stars, just like DJ Khaled or French Montana does in his songs, or the majority of like pop albums today that just have ridiculous amount of features, and it never amounts to a good album. It just ends up being really spotty and has a few good tracks here and there, but then overall the album, it wasn't meant to be made as an album. It's just sort of there to hype up all the songs that'll hit the charts. And I just didn't think Gorillaz were ever like that. Not like any of these songs have hit the charts, but it just feels that kind of way. They've always been the masters of having so many features but incorporating them in a unique and crazy way that you would never think would work, just like how they had MF Doom, you know, relatively unknown at the time, but Gorillaz with that forward-thinking act that included artists like that in their songs and made classics because of it. This one just felt lazy, really. And that's my list. Let me know your disappointments from 2017, if these were similar to your picks, or what else you would think would be on your list if you were to make one. And tell me your thoughts on these albums. I'm pretty sure most of these albums ended up being quite mixed in the review world, so I don't think I've got anything on here that isn't on most people's lists, especially the Arcade Fire one, and Humanz as well. Most people were quite disappointed with that. So yeah, I might have missed off some disappointing albums if I've not heard them, and I probably won't listen to them if they're disappointing. But let me know your list, let me know. And subscribe to the channel for more videos, more lists as well, because it's the end of the year. And have a good day.